November 7th, 2012. Final programming of the radio transmitter. Broadcasting a repeating half-second interval of silence, followed by 1 second of nothing, at 433.665 MHz. November 8th, 7:14 a.m. Launched the buoy from the jetty at Montrose Beach. A 15-kilometer-an-hour wind was blowing to the east. Once the buoy moved past the sheltering edge of the jetty, it took off. I stood and watched the buoy for 2 hours until it disappeared from sight. November 8th, 4 p.m. Listened from Ohio Beach, roughly 8 kilometers south of Montrose. Sabri came along to help with the observation. The signal was much weaker than in earlier tests over the same distance, probably indicating that the buoy had traveled a significant distance to the north in the 9 hours since launch. The wind had shifted to the northeast earlier in the day, and it had also increased in speed to about 40 kilometers an hour. Thankfully, Sabri was on hand to verify that the signal was actually there. November 9th, 1:04 p.m. Listened from Foster Beach, several kilometers north-northwest of the Montrose jetty. I thought I heard the signal, but could not be sure. 9:13 p.m. At home, I decided to test my perception of a recording made at the beach. Using a multi-track recording program, I tapped a microphone whenever I thought I heard the signal in the field recording. After several takes, I looked at the results and saw that 4 of the 5 attempts were perfectly aligned and synchronized, suggesting that the signal was actually perceptible. But when I overlaid the recording of the signal from the launch, I discovered that these taps were all happening too fast to be correlated with the real signal. November 10th, 12:05 p.m. A thunderstorm passed through Chicago and over the lake. It occurred to me that the buoy is a lightning rod, and so stands a decent chance of being instantly obliterated. November 11th. National Weather Service issued a severe wind advisory. Winds of the lake were 60 kilometers an hour. Weeks ago, I looked at maps made by satellite drifter buoys deployed in Lake Michigan by researchers, and none traveled more than a half mile or so in a day. But these winds made me doubt that estimate. Looking at video from the launch, I made a rough estimate of the buoy's speed, 10 centimeters per second in 18-kilometer-an-hour wind, making the wind speed to buoy speed ratio approximately 50-1. The winds in the past 96 hours could have taken it 100 kilometers or more. It started to sink in that my ability to guess the buoy's rough location was rapidly fading, if not already gone. November 11th, 3:02 p.m. I went back to the Montrose jetty to listen for the signal, not with the hope that I'd find it, but so that I could be certain that it was gone. On my walk home through the marina, I fought to walk in the strong wind and felt the swiftness of the buoy's disappearance. November 12th, 4:30 p.m. Perhaps a trip farther north might yield results? At noon, I took the Union Pacific North train to the end of the line at Kenosha, Wisconsin, a small town on the lake roughly 100 kilometers north of the launch site. On the train, I pointed the antenna out towards the lake and listened for most of the trip, at times thinking I might have heard something, never with much confidence. In Kenosha, I stood and listened on the rocks for hours in the freezing wind, but could not find the signal. November 12th. If I continue the search, where would I look next? Perhaps a drive along the Illinois-Wisconsin shore? But strong winds have been blowing eastward since yesterday, so there's little chance that the buoy is within range of any shore. November 17th. The steady winds to the east didn't pan out. They changed to the north after blowing for just long enough to put the buoy somewhere in the middle of the lake. I feel guilty for not continuing the search, but I now must admit that I cannot even make an educated guess about where the buoy might be, besides that it's likely still in Lake Michigan. November 17th. I now have some kind of new hope. Every day, I've been downloading and saving hourly maps of the winds on Lake Michigan from a website. Recently, I missed a day, and while searching for a wind archive, I found the raw data behind the maps. Every hour, a computer takes in atmospheric readings from dozens of weather stations around and in the lake, runs a fluid simulation, and publishes a grid of 14,000 wind and current estimates covering Lake Michigan. Thinking I'd make my own, larger wind and current maps from the data, I wrote a computer program that plotted these hourly estimates. In a sudden moment of clarity, it occurred to me that I could use the same program to chart estimates of the buoy's path. November 19th. Read several scientific papers on estimating leeway drift, the technical term for the movement of an object blown by the wind. Putting it all together, I made a few simulations using different estimates of the wind to leeway ratio. I expected these to diverge wildly, as the lake's currents are a chaotic system where small measurement differences can multiply over time into large discrepancies. But instead, the paths seemed to align very well, with little divergence. Each simulation ended with the buoy in the middle of the lake, headed north. November 21st. The buoy is still in the middle of the lake, still drifting north in all the simulations I've run. November 25th, 5:37 p.m. Checked into the Manistee Inn. After updating the computer model this morning with the latest data and discovering the potential for landfall, I rented a car and drove to the northwest shore of Michigan. Arriving at Ludington, Michigan just before sunset, I walked out on the jetty and was greeted with a scene that would have stirred the hearts of countless postcard photographers and painters of light, complete with lighthouse whitecaps, shimmering water, and rays of sun illuminating distant waters. The wind was strong. I nearly lost my lens bag, and it was painfully cold. I did not hear a signal. November 27th, 11 p.m. Driving home to Chicago, I stopped for internet access in Ludington, Michigan. For the past 2 days, I had driven hundreds of miles on icy backcountry roads and walked dozens on snowy beaches, finding nothing but static. But part of me still couldn't give up the search. Using updated wind and current data and a revised estimate of the wind-to-leeway ratio, I ran a simulation that showed that the buoy might still be in the water about 5 miles off the coast of Holland, Michigan. November 28th, 1 a.m. Arrived at Holland State Park. Surprisingly, the beach was open, and the 3-acre parking lot was unsurprisingly vacant. When I turned on the receiver, I heard the signal. It was not clear enough for certainty, but after days of hearing nothing, this moment seemed different. November 28th, 3 a.m. I found a hotel in Holland and started listening to the recording. Applying a technique I developed earlier to test my perception of the signal, I noticed that my attempts to trace its pattern seemed to agree with each other much more than with previous uncertain recordings, and the timing of the pulses lined up perfectly with those in the earlier recording I'd made of the buoy in the studio. November 29th, 12:45 p.m. Did I find it? I think so. Yesterday, the wind blew away from the coast, but now it's heading inland again. There's a good chance it'll land on one of Holland's many private beaches tomorrow. I'll rent another car and head out in the morning. November 30th, 9:30 p.m. A long day of searching from Holland to Manistee yielded nothing. At the confluence of Lake Michigan and Lake Mactawa, at the end of the jetty where days ago I heard the buoy's distant signal, I returned only to find it more distant or gone altogether. Because of the possibility of landfall and the whims of the currents near the shore, this time and place marks the point where my wind and current model, though it proved more clairvoyant than I would have guessed, breaks down into uncertainty that can't anchor much hope for further searching. I could continue, but as a fisherman on a cold, dark jetty in Grand Haven said to me late that night, it's kind of a needle in a haystack. One day I might listen again for the sake of listening, but now, despite my best efforts and a rekindled hope, it is gone.